Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm Simon Carver, here with Billy Galligan, author. And Billy, I want to start today with a number that completely reframes how we look at American cities. 43 million. That is the number of US citizens today who identify their national background as Irish. That is 1/6 of the entire country, rooted in an extraordinary migration that saw 6 million people cross the Atlantic since 1820.
Aye, 43 million is staggering when you think about it, Simon. But you have to remember where that flood began. It wasn't some grand, comfortable adventure. It was a desperate flight. The peak of it, of course, was the Great Famine between 1845 and 1852. In just 10 years, nearly 2 million people, a quarter of the whole island's population, packed into those wooden ships and headed west. In County Mayo alone, the population plummeted from over 388,000 down to 274,000 in a single decade. They arrived in places like Boston and New York with absolutely nothing but the clothes on their backs and a deep mistrust of the authorities they'd left behind.
Right, they land in these massive, fast-growing American cities that are openly hostile to them. They're seen as a dirty, disease-ridden underclass. And because the official municipal governments of the mid-19th century offered absolutely no social safety net, the Irish had to build their own. They did it through what historians call the triangle of power: the local democratic ward, the Catholic parish and the Labour Union. These weren't just social clubs, Billy. They were a survival machine.
Oh, they were the ultimate engine of survival, Simon. Let's look under the bonnet of that. If you're a fresh immigrant stepping off a boat at the docks, you don't care about grand political philosophy or national debates. You care about where your next meal is coming from and where you're going to sleep. That's where the parish and the ward came in. The Catholic parish hall was the absolute anchor of the neighborhood. It was the school, the community center, and the welfare office all rolled into one. And right next to it was the local ward boss, usually operating out of a neighborhood saloon.
The saloon as a welfare office. That is a very specific kind of municipal service. But it worked because of the direct reciprocity. The ward boss would hand over a bucket of coal to keep your family warm through a brutal East Coast winter. Or he'd get your son a job digging a sewer line. He didn't ask for money because you didn't have any. He asked for one thing: your vote on election day.
Exactly. Sure, why not, you'd say. A bucket of coal for a mark on a ballot? That's a fair trade when you're freezing. It was a beautiful transactional relationship. The established elite looked down their noses at it, calling it corrupt. But for the Irish, it was the first time in their lives that their presence actually had value. In Ireland, their land had been subdivided down to tiny, subsistence-level plots to feed a doubling population on nothing but the potato. They had no power. But in America, suddenly, their sheer numbers meant they were a highly organized voting bloc that could swing an entire municipal election.
It is an incredible pivot from absolute destitution to leverage. You go from being the victims of a cataclysmic famine to the people who decide who becomes the mayor of New York or Boston. And the third leg of that stool was the Labour Union. Because the Irish were doing the hardest, most dangerous physical labour in the country, they realised very quickly that if they stood together, they could shut the whole city down.
Aye, there was a real steel in them. When you've survived the coffin ships, where thousands died of typhoid and cholera in crowded, unsanitary holds, you're not easily intimidated by a factory foreman or a construction boss. You form a union, you stand on the picket line, and you back each other up. The parish gave them spiritual comfort, the union gave them workplace power, and the ward boss gave them political teeth.
Let's look at how that machine actually operated on the ground, because the scale of it is fascinating. We're talking about organisations like Tammany Hall in New York. The mechanics of Tammany weren't driven by high-minded policy papers. It was the ward healer, the local neighbourhood operative, doing the retail work. If a tenement building burned down, the Tammany man was there with food and temporary lodging before the fire engines had even finished putting out the ember.
It was practical kitchen table intelligence, Simon. You didn't win a voter by lecturing him on tariff reform. You won him by knowing his name, knowing his kids, and showing up with a sack of potatoes when he was laid off. And the beauty of the system was how it connected directly to the physical building of America. Think about what was happening in the 19th century. These cities were exploding. They were building the subways, digging the canals, laying down miles of water pipes, and paving the streets with millions of bricks. And who was doing that backbreaking work? It was the Irish.
And because Tammany Hall, or the local machine, controlled the city contracts for those massive public works, they controlled the jobs. It was a closed loop of patronage. The Irish labourers laid the bricks for the new streets, the Irish-controlled City Hall paid the contractors, and those contractors hired the Irish voters. If you wanted a job on the new municipal waterworks, you went to your ward boss, got his recommendation, and then you went to work.
It was a self-sustaining cycle, and it gave the Irish a sense of ownership over the very fabric of the city. When you've laid the bricks for the street, you don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong on it. It changed the psychology of the community. They weren't just guests in America anymore. They were the ones pouring the concrete and running the precincts.
And this completely reshaped American politics. Before this era, politics was largely the domain of the wealthy, educated elite, men who debated philosophy and held elegant dinners. The Irish turned politics into a professional career for the working class. It became a way out of poverty. If you were smart, charismatic and organised, you didn't need a university degree to wield real power. You just needed to know how to organise your neighbour.
It was blue-collar power. It laid the foundation for the modern American labor movement and the modern welfare state. Long before the federal government ever thought of Social Security or unemployment benefits, the local political machine was providing a rough, informal version of it. It was messy, it was often corrupt, and it certainly wasn't perfect, but it kept people alive and gave them a seat at the table.
It's a fascinating legacy. The very institutions built for basic survival in a hostile world ended up rewriting the rules of American democracy. Billy, thanks for walking us through the machinery of it all.
It's a pleasure, Simon. A nearly true story, as we say, or at least as true as history allows. Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for listening. We'll see you next time.